Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video we are going to be talking about Rivals of Aether 2 at Frosty Fausting 17, I believe this one was. And it should be noted that this was an extremely top heavy tournament for Rivals, and because of that we're only going to be focusing on a couple players and how their runs went specifically, but the majority of this video is going to be talking about how we can use this event to kind of glean what the meta of Rivals 2 is currently looking like. But first things first, our top 16 finishers are going to be YXL, Wiley22, Enter Zero, and Young Quaff in 13th. You're going to have Lucius, Raven King, Super Salty, and Frosty in 9th place. In 7th place, you're going to have Doman and Big Math. 5th place was Anakin, Skinwalker, and Rymo. 4th place was Mr. Watch and Learn. 3rd place was Zaqk. 2nd place was Biobirb, and winning the entire thing was Marlon. So first things first, we're going to talk about the character composition for the top 48 of this event. I'll put it on the screen for you right now. And I included secondaries in this, so it may be 1 or 2 characters off, but for the most part, this is going to be accurate. And starting at the bottom, you're going to see that unfortunately, Etalus did not get a single rep within that top 48. Either like someone went him when they were already losing, or Marlon goes him in grand finals to win. Like those don't really count in my opinion. So 0 reps in the top 48. And I think that this is definitely expected. Obviously, the character just came out, but also he is like the worst character in the game, and it's by a pretty significant margin. But it also, again, does not help that the character just came out, because everyone at this point in the game has had like 3 to 4 months to kind of work on their neutral and advantage state. Etalus has a very complicated neutral, and now you're just having to adjust to that. And I also think his advantage state is just a lot weaker than pretty much every other character in this game, in combination with the worst disadvantage state in the game. And I do mean the worst disadvantage state in the game. It is absolutely abhorrent once this bear gets sent up into the air. So with all of those things being combined, I think it's going to be extremely difficult for Etalus players to find success with this character at really any level of high level play. Like maybe you could see a couple of them sneaking into that top 48, but I would be very surprised if you saw any Etalus players making top 8 at a big event anytime soon. Unless a couple big changes or some meta developments happens, this character is not in a great spot. Also, I'm going to insert this really quickly right here, just so you have a frame of reference on where I would generally put these characters on the tier list, what I think about them. If you want a full explanation, I have a tier list video out pretty recently. You can just go watch that. But back to whatever I was saying. Moving on from that 1 to 3 range, you're going to have Fleet in 1, Orcane and Loxodon in 2, and Clairen in 3. And we'll talk about Orcane and Fleet in just a second here, but I want to start off with Loxodons, and I think this is about where you'd expect Loxodon to see, and the general trends for this character, in my opinion, are going to be that you see 1, 2, maybe even up to 5, honestly, in that top 48 area, but once you get to the top 32, to the top 16, it'll drop down to like probably 1 or 2 max, and once you get into those top 8s, this character will pretty much be non-existent, and it's kind of like the Kragg effect, except if Kragg just wasn't a super strong character and was just instead a pretty solid character that is also extremely volatile. And I think that Loxodon is a lot more volatile than Kragg, just because magma is so important for his recovery, and when he doesn't have magma, he is just absolutely abused in that disadvantage state, especially against players that absolutely know how to exploit him. So because of that, I am not surprised to see Loxodon players getting into that top 48. The character is still good enough, your walling tools and your advantage state are still strong enough that you absolutely can get in there, but I think you'll start seeing Loxodon players kind of fall off more so when it gets deeper into these top 48s, and I do think that Frosty Fausting reflects that pretty well. Now, clairen, I do think, is a little bit of an outlier. I could see her even having up to 5 or 6 reps, but I do think this is generally where you are going to find Claire. She is a pretty easy character to pick up because all you really need to do is know how to space, and then you have to learn some pretty basic combos. But if you can space, then you are going to be absolutely fine with this character. But I also think that her advantage state and her neutral isn't as strong as the characters above her, the characters that you see more represented above her as well. So because of that, I think for the most part, you're going to see clairen players getting pretty far into the top 48, but maybe not too many clairen players in that top 48, if that makes sense. Because the clairen players that are going far are obviously very good because they have their spacing on lock, they know their routes. But the clairen players that aren't very good, the ones that aren't consistently doing those tippers at all times, they aren't going to be getting far in tournament at all. So for Loxodon and clairen, I think this is about where you would expect to see the representation of these characters, but I think the representation of these characters would kind of appear in different parts of the bracket, if that makes sense. You're going to see clairen more so towards those top 8s, where you're going to see Loxodon more so towards those bottom ends of the top 48. Really quickly, I just want to say that's not how things unfolded at this event. The highest placing clairen player at Frosty Fausting was Stay Stay. I believe that's how you say that, and they ended up finishing in 25th place. I just think that's how the general trend is going to happen for future tournaments. Just want to make that clear. Moving on to Maple, who is going to be on an island of her own with 5 reps in this top 48. And I actually think this is probably exactly around where you will see Maple. Even though I do believe that Maple is the best character in the game, I don't expect her to be the most represented character in the game because she is extremely difficult. The ceiling on this character is really, really high, and the floor on this character is also very low, in my opinion. What you're getting with a low-level Maple is way worse than what you're getting with a low-level Rano, low-level Kragg, and that applies to the mid-level, and that even applies to the high level. Only once you really get to that top level is when I believe Maple actually starts to usurp these other characters. So it really does just come down to the individual talent of these Maple players and how they are going to be finding success with their characters. So because of that, I don't think Maple is going to be a character like clairen and Lockstone, where you see them more so towards certain parts of the bracket once you get further in. I think Maple is going to be spread out through every part of the bracket. You're going to have half the Maple players going 0-2, and the other half of them are going to be getting into that top 8, because this is the character that I think you're able to express your skill the most relative to any other character in this game. So Maple, I think, is a character that is going to have high variance in pretty much every single tournament that she shows up to, but for the most part, I would expect her to be in that middle range, not as highly represented as some of those characters like Zqk, Rano, Kragg, but definitely more represented than some of the bad characters in this game, and she'll be finding success at literally every single level of play, or she should be if the Maple players actually figure out how to play her. And we've got our final characters in that 7 to 9 range. You got Rano and Forsburn in 7, Zqk and wrastor in 8, and Kragg in 9. And for Zqk, Rano, and Forsburn, this is exactly where I expect these characters to be. And I honestly don't really have anything to say about them. These are just going to be some of the most prevalent characters that you have in Rivals 2. Now, wrastor, I'm not surprised to see him up here, but I just didn't expect to see him up here. And I know that doesn't make sense, but I think wrastor is the second best character in the game. So tier-wise, this absolutely makes sense to me, but I just didn't expect the wrastor players to kind of figure him out so fast. I thought the average level of play of this character would be pretty low for quite some times, and I do believe that this event is definitely going to be an outlier. Like, Genesis is probably the next big Rivals 2 event. I don't believe you're going to see as many wrastors in that top 48 area, but it is definitely going to be trending up with this character because he is absurdly strong. He's got some of, if not the best killing in the entire game, just because of his edge guarding and amazing setups into up B. Up B is just such a strong tool for wrastor to have, and wrastor players are getting really good at converting into it. So because of that, it's really consistent for wrastor to get those kills. And while the character is definitely light, which adds to volatility, he's also got a really solid disadvantage state, and I would way rather be a light character with a good disadvantage than a heavy character with a bad disadvantage. So I think wrastor should continue to trend upward, though I do think that he is a little bit higher than he would typically be at an event like this. And finally, you are going to have Kragg in that 9 range, and this is exactly around where I expect Kragg to be. But as I say in every single video that I make about Rivals, I do think that Kragg is going to just steadily fall off over time because this character's disadvantage state is not raw or strong relative to the other characters in the game. And this character's advantage state is still super strong, but now relative to the other characters in this game, it's not like way better than it was as before. Kragg used to be consistently robbing stocks, and he is still consistently robbing stocks, but now other people are doing that. And I think that's kind of the big difference. It's not really Kragg falling off, but more so other characters are just catching up way faster than Kragg is actually progressing. And I think that the top 8 is pretty indicative of that. So the character composition for the top 8 is going to be 1 Fleet, 1 Orcane, 1 Zqk, 3 Wrastors, and 3 Forsburns. The reason there's 9 people is because Marlon used both Orcane and wrastor for success. But as you can see, there is no Kragg players in this top 8. But obviously, there's also no Rano players in top 8. There's no clairen players. There's no Maple players. Does that mean that those characters are bad? No. That's not the point that I'm trying to get across here. The point that I'm trying to get across here is kind of similar to the point that I made earlier for Lockstone, is I think Kragg is going to be a character that you are still going to see represented in the top 48, but once it starts getting to those top 16s, once you start getting those top 8s, you are not going to see as many Kragg players. Now, you're definitely still going to see them in the top 8s for these next couple months, just because there's a lot of very good Kragg players, like ZB is amazing, Ion is amazing, Zeus is amazing. Those should all be top 8 threats, but aside from that, I do think that you're going to see a lot less Kragg in the top 8 as this character's advantage state and disadvantage state are just a lot weaker relative to the characters around him. And I said I'd talk about Fleet and Orcane later. Well, I'm going to talk about them now. And it's kind of similar to the point earlier that I made about clairen, except I'm just going to take it to the maximum extreme, where you're going to see like one or two, maybe three Fleet or Arcane players getting into these top 48 areas. But when you do see them, they are very consistently going to be getting pretty far into the bracket. These are people that I think are going to continue investing time in the character specialists that are actually going to thrive, because you should be thriving with these characters if you're putting your time in with them. Fleet still has the best edge guarding in the game. You're consistently able to get people before they even get to blast zonable percents, and it just takes time learning the flowcharts of everyone else's recovery. And there's only 10 characters in this game. It is very feasible to learn the flowcharts of everyone else's recovery. So if someone takes time to do that with Fleet, they should have a ton of success with that character. And it's kind of similar to Arcane. I think you're going to need to maybe put in a little bit more work, but you've absolutely got some movement and some zoning with this character that's really difficult to get in against. His boxing is also way better than I initially thought it was. Marlon definitely showed me that this weekend. So I think Fleet and Arcane, you should be able to make these characters work if you are putting the time into it. And I think the people that are putting the time into it are going to be rewarded pretty good with those top 8, top 16 placements. Also, I should point out quickly that I do think it is an outlier that there are 3 wrastors and 3 Forsburn players in the top 8, even if I do think that these characters are very strong. Anytime there's more than 2 reps of the character in the top 8, I just think in general that is going to be an outlier. I would normally expect at least 1 or 2 Rano/clairen, even Maple players to get into this top 8 and take one of those placements, a kragg player as well. So it's not crazy to see 3 of those characters in the top 8. They're absolutely good enough to justify that, but I do think that is going to be an outlier. Don't expect this to be the norm. Now that we've gone over the character compositions, we can start talking about some of those runs. And I've got 4 of them that I want to highlight today, 3 of them getting into the top 3. So let's talk about the one that didn't, in Doman, who has a very nice losers run after losing to Rimo. He gets a win on Adius, who was the only person who managed to take a game off of him before he gets into that top 8. And I'm also pretty sure they were playing random. So shoutouts to Adius regardless, but especially if they were playing random. After that, Doman gets a 3-0 win over Stay in clairen Fleet, which I do think is that character's worst matchup. So manages to overcome that. 3-0 over Matador, 3-0 over Taro, and then a 3-0 over Raven King as well before losing to Mr. Watch and Learn. So maybe Forsburn is actually the worst matchup for Fleet, getting double eliminated by that character at this event. But regardless, this is a very impressive run from Doman. And unfortunately, since it was in the losers bracket, we didn't really get to see a lot of his runs, but I imagine that he was able to find his success because his flowcharts off stage were just very good. He was consistently able to get some of those edge guards, and also just knowing how to weave in and out of combat is something that is key for Fleet. Having float as a mechanic is going to make it so that your micro spacing is the best in the game, and I am almost 1000% certain that Doman was able to make at least a little bit of utilization out of that in the losers side of the bracket. So massive shout outs to Doman. This is an absolutely ridiculous losers run, and if it wasn't for the other losers run that we were going to talk about, it'd be the most impressive one of the event. And that other losers run is going to come from our esteemed 3rd place finisher of Zaqk, who gets upset fairly early on by Jet the Jenga God, which shout out to Jet the Jenga God, not only a Smash guy, but also the best kragg player to ever touch planet Earth. But in the loser side, you're going to have Zaqk getting wins on Seth, Ellis, Joe Mama, YXL, and Frosty to get himself into that top 8. That Frosty one, I think, is especially impressive, just considering that he does end up losing to Jet the Jenga God in the winner side in kragg versus Forsburn, but he wins it against Frosty in the loser side. And I think Frosty was playing really good at this event, by the way. One of probably the best kragg that we had at the event. So clearly, once you had Zaqk in this loser side, he turned up, and he did not slow down, getting a 3-1 win over Big Mac, 3-1 win over Rimo, and a 3-0 win over Mr. Watch and Learn before losing to Biobirb in a 3-0 himself, even trying clairen in those final 2 games, but to no success. And I was really impressed by Zaq's play at this event. There weren't any specific Forsburn things that he was doing that I noticed other Forsburn players weren't doing, but he just seemed fundamentally so solid. His decision making was amazing. He was obviously incredibly quick, and the most impressive losers run that I've yet to see in Rivals of Aether 2. Like, maybe another one exists, but I just personally have not seen it. 8 wins in a row is absolutely ludicrous. He should be feeling extremely happy about this, and I really hope that I get to see him more at these next couple majors, because coming into this event, I had no idea who Zaqk was, and now I'm a really big fan. Our 2nd place finisher is going to be Biobirb, and I feel like this is a player that does not get nearly enough credit. I think he is amazing, and I was really impressed by his play at this event. He's got nice wins on Young Quaff and Frosty to get himself into top 8. Once in that top 8, he gets a win on Anakin Skinwalker before falling to Marlon, beats Zaqk to get into the grand finals, and then loses the run back to Marlon. And if it wasn't for Marlon himself being a wrastor player, I would say that Biobirb is the front runner for the best wrastor player in the world right now. You're also going to have Mr. R in that conversation, but it's a little bit harder to tell with him just because he is on the other side of the globe, doesn't have the same experience. Applewiz is also very good, but the thing that I got to give the compliment to for Biobirb is going to be his upbeats. His upbeats are the best of any wrastor player that I've ever seen, and that's including Marlon as well. He just has so many creative ways of finding the upbeat, whether it's with a follow-up or just going for it raw. He does not care. He is absolutely going to be pressing that button. And I think it's because a lot of the upbeats that he's going to be going for, the rift reward is just heavily skewed into his favor. He's doing it when the opponent is already up in the air, so it's not like they have the option to shield it. He's B-reversing the upbeat as well, so even if you only get the sour spot hitbox, the opponent's getting set one way, the wrastor is drifting the other way, presumably going to be able to land on a platform as well. Just the timings and the spacings that he would take for his upbeats were so incredible, and he was just hitting them so consistently throughout the event, and because of that, you never found his opponents living past like 120, 130%. And this is all in combination with him also having incredible edge guarding, really good slipstream usage. Obviously, his neutral was really good, making usage of all those jumps. Like, all the stuff that Biobirb was doing was good, but the thing that you definitely got to give him the most credit for is going to be those upbeats. I was really, really impressed by those. Big ups to him. And our big winner of Frosty Fausting, to literally no one's surprise, is going to be Marlon. He's going to get wins over Gluteus, Raven King, Rhymo, and 2 wins over Biobirb with 0 games dropped. I also should mention really quickly that Biobirb did go kragg in that final game of top 8, but I didn't include it in the character composition because you also had Marlon going Etalus in that game, so I don't know if he went kragg because Marlon went Etalus. I know Biobirb also has a kragg secondary, so maybe Marlon just went Etalus because Biobirb went kragg. I don't know, but I didn't include it because it was to a losing effort, so it doesn't really matter anyway, and that's not the topic at hand. The topic at hand is Marlon, and he was very impressive at this event. No games dropped, and he would go wrastor for everyone except for the other wrastor players, in which case he would play orcane. Now, it's probably because he just doesn't like the ditto, but I like to imagine it's because he doesn't want to let the other wrastor players know how he plays. You know, he doesn't want them to think how he thinks, so he doesn't even let them have a frame of reference there. And I will say, Marlon is someone that is constantly pushing orcane. He says this character is really good, super broken. I was not convinced at all by his orcane play at this event that this character is good. What I saw was just, oh my god, this is like the fastest player that I've ever seen. And Marlon is the fastest player that I've ever seen. Like, maybe only rivaled by ZB. This guy moves around so incredibly quick, controlling so much space, especially on the orcane. It felt super apparent just because you don't have to rely on that slipstream. And his boxing with orcane was also insane. Just usage of nair, specifically nair, was like incredible. But down tilt as well, F tilt whenever he would want to do that, just as a call that would pretty much always hit. So it feels like orcane wasn't really good. He was just being piloted by someone who was like way better than everyone he was playing against and was just moving around. So I'm gonna have to see a little bit more orcane play from Marlon before I actually get to see the character being good instead of him being good. But it's very clear that he is amazing. Did not skip a beat at all over his small ban, and I'm really happy to have him back to that top level of play just before Genesis as well. It's gonna be super interesting to see who takes that #1 spot with Cake Assault and him, as well as players like Spargo, ZB rising those ranks. So really excited to see what the future of Rivals 2 holds. And with that, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Sport has been absolutely unreal. As if there's anything I left out, got wrong, or if you just want to say hi, leave a comment down below. Be sure to sub while you're down there, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!